What are those, I don't know, factors that cause police to take certain cases more seriously than others?
A lot of it's to do with vulnerability and marginalized status. So, Indigenous women, girls, Black women, girls, unhoused people, people who use substances, youth in care. These groups are coming up time and time again in my data, and in inquiries, like public inquiries into, like you brought up, the Bruce McArthur cases. About these are the types of cases that get minimized, disregarded, misclassified, and entirely ignored. And these cases, in turn, are stigmatized and stereotyped and treated as non-urgent or less urgent, like something's wrong.
Welcome to the Scaries, brought to you by Racer Co. I'm Sky.
And I'm Talitha. We are proudly broadcasting from Treaty 4 territory in the homeland of the Métis. In each episode, we tackle the alarming, inconceivable, questionable, shocking, and scary statistics that impact women and girls around the world.
And you'll hear the scary truth, take away tools and tips, and learn about what you can do about it. And the Scaries is an opportunity to raise awareness, share resources, and collectively use our power as women and supporters of women to make real change. We'd always like to note that the views expressed on this podcast are solely our own and is for entertainment purposes only. Also, much of what we discuss specifically in this episode could be triggering, so please listen with caution.
As straight, cisgender, white, able-bodied settler women, we are very aware of the privilege that we have, and we want to use this platform to spread awareness about the scary reality that women from around the world face in different life situations.
Why?
Because sometimes nothing is scarier than being a woman.
Picture this. She walked out at dusk to buy bread. Never came back. Police chalked it up as a runaway, but her family knows better.
What we're stepping into today isn't a TV drama. It isn't a true crime podcast. It isn't a new Netflix limited series. It's real. And it's what's happening too often to women and girls, especially after dark, in rural towns, along highways, or even just inner cities.
And it's not just about one case. This is a pattern, and it's a pattern that we've seen for years, for decades, forever, pretty much. It's a reoccurring nightmare where women fall off the map emotionally, socially, and institutionally. Today's episode is heavier than our usual Scaries, but also one of the most important conversations we've had. And it really is a follow-up to one that we had last year in spring, where we had the story of Happy Charles and her parents come on and talk about her being missing. And so with that, we know that specifically in Saskatchewan, missing Indigenous women are a story that we hear too often, way too often. And this kind of pain stays in your chest with a dull leg. And I still feel that after, having that conversation with Happy Charles's family.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we are talking about this week, about the systematic and systemic barriers and scaries behind these specific disappearances. And we've got a very powerful and wonderful guest to help us, Dr. Lorna Ferguson, who is an award-winning criminologist and founder of the Missing Persons Research Hub.
Definitely check it out. Google that right now if you can. She's trained over 40 police services across North America, influenced national policy, and exposed how missing persons systems can fail those who need the most.
Definitely. Okay, so with that, let's time travel for a second. The idea that women just run away or disappear has been baked into how missing persons are handled for decades, especially if the woman is Indigenous or from a lower economic bracket, who maybe uses substance or has substance abuse problems or struggles with mental illness.
And the thing is, missing is never a neutral word. It's implied blame or shame, or that someone's absence was their own fault or sometimes someone else's fault. But there's always a fault.
Yeah, exactly. In Canada, for years, Indigenous families have raised alarms about loved ones going missing, only to be told, just wait it out. Hold on a second. Or they'd probably turn up. But spoiler, That absolutely wasn't true, and they don't.
And let's be real, this didn't start with Google alerts or milk cartons. From residential schools to the 60s scoop, Indigenous girls are going missing in droves long before anyone thought to keep track.
Definitely. Even the terminology in older police files is a dead giveaway. Girls would be listed as runaways or at risk runaway rather than missing, basically closing the door before anyone even knows. So, as we always do, let's talk about the statistics, the real life numbers that are behind missing people, missing persons in Canada specifically. It's not a nice situation. I'll tell you that right now. In Canada, an average of 70,000 people are reported missing each year. Of those, about 60% are under the age of 18 and over 50% are female.
But let's talk Saskatchewan specifically. Despite being just 3% of the population, Indigenous women make up over 60% of the missing women and girls in the province. That is a huge discrepancy that has so many problems with that.
That's very problematic.
Yes.
And then here's another stat specifically regarding Indigenous women. They are 12 times more likely to be murdered or go missing than non-Indigenous women. That is from the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls from 2019. That may have changed. That stat may be more, but 12 times more likely is a lot.
Yeah, not okay. And Dr. Ferguson's own research shows that most missing person cases involving vulnerable women are not initially prioritized. Her study on cold cases in urban police jurisdictions found that bias and credibility assessments skew heavily against Indigenous and racialized women.
Translation. If a white university student goes missing, then she gets an Amber Alert, she gets a media blitz, there's maybe drones or search dogs, perhaps. And if Indigenous woman goes missing, she gets a shrug and maybe like a delayed report, if that's what it feels like.
The more valued you are by society and the more model citizen, the more your behaviors align with what's acceptable, the more time, the more energy, the more effort you get.
More privileged you are.
Exactly. 100%. And so we have to say this bluntly. This isn't about individual bad cops. We're not, pointing all the fingers at the cops. This is a systematic issue. It's how the playbook was written. And Dr. Ferguson is one of the few trying to rewrite it.
Yeah, exactly. Getting close to home for us, we're both mothers. Mothers are 96% of missing, murdered Indigenous women in Saskatchewan have had children. That's whole families fractured.
A related shadow hides in BC, but amplifies our point. The Highway of Tears cases happen because many women, particularly Indigenous, had no ride. Hitchhiking was their only option.
That's the fact that there's an entire road named Highway of Tears because it's known for that. Terrifying. And our CMP project also traced 18 confirmed disappearances along Highway 16, yet community groups say the real number is probably closer to 40, and many cases remain unsolved.
And in Saskatchewan, the lack of transit, poverty, isolation, all of those things echo the same vulnerabilities that feed these tragedies.
So why are so many women slipping through the cracks? There isn't one glitch. It's built into the system.
Police triage cases by credibility or urgency, or when we chat with Dr. Lorna, by crime. Like, what kind of crime is involved? And if there isn't, good luck getting much traction. So people also with mental health challenges, housing instability, stigmatized identities, again, all deemed less credible, less valuable, and therefore less need to be found.
Yeah. And when bias is infused into protocols or how folks do things, this becomes then routine. Search timelines get delayed, surveillance isn't deployed, and reports, maybe get lost.
So media focus really does skew attention to, as we'll chat about in depth with Dr. Lorna Ferguson. News loves a runaway teen or a model citizen missing. But when we have an Indigenous or poor woman or someone who has mental health struggles, really not at the top of the list.
Humanizing these stats is really what we need to do, and remembering that there are faces like, Michaela Bali, a 16-year-old from Yorkton, Saskatchewan. She's been missing since April 12th, 2016. And there's no resolution, and families live in limbo.
Each story cracks open how systemic invisibility contributes to real tragedies because this is not a paperback horror. It's not a Netflix special. It's daily life. And if you're a woman in Canada or anywhere, you're more at risk than headlines suggest.
These disappearances aren't random. They're the product of policies and of prejudices and underfunded transit and police indifference and societal apathy.
And it's structurally scary and fixable if we choose it to be.
Which is why we invited Dr. Lorna Ferguson, who does this work every single day. She researches and partners with police and trains departments and fights for policy reform. In just a moment, we'll go one-on-one with her. We'll ask what can change, where do systems fail first, and what can we all do to shift the needle. So to help us make sense of all of this, we're incredibly grateful to be joined by Dr. Lorna Ferguson, someone who has made it her life's mission to make sure that when someone goes missing, they aren't just another file in a drawer.
Lorna is an award-winning criminologist and the founder of Missing Persons Research Hub. She's worked with over 40 police services across North America, digging into the hard questions most people don't want to touch, like why some missing person cases are solved and why so many are not.
She's trained officers, advised on cold cases, consulted on major reviews, including the failures surrounding the Bruce MacArthur investigation in Toronto, which is something I followed very closely. And she's written extensively about how bias, bureaucracy, and broken systems put vulnerable people at even greater risk.
But beyond all the titles and the published research, Lorna brings her heart to this work. She listens, she believes families, and she fights to build systems that care enough to look harder, longer, and better. And we're very excited to share that she's releasing a book in 2026 all around the subject. It's called Missing Persons Beyond Serial Killers and Unexplained Disappearances. And we've been told that we can find it on Amazon and all the places online. So just give it a Google in 2026.
We'll share more when it comes out.
Yes.
So before we get into it's always tough and it's always heavy, but the really heavy, tough stuff, we like to just kick things off with a rapid fire round of questions that we ask our guests every single time we have a guest, just to, shake out the nerves and get loose. So Lorna, are you ready?
Oh, I'm so ready. Thanks for having me, by the way.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Okay. So first question, and I will advise you, this is a little bit deep. It's not super light, but take it what you will. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
The simple sentence of just keep showing up. For people who have issues with experiencing rejection or are worried about what people think or have, been told no, sometimes those are enough to stop us from trying, right? Stop us from going to that experience or showing up for people or showing up for yourself. And so for me, I faced a lot of barriers in my work. I've been told no so many times. I've lost count. I've faced so many different types of rejections. And if I'd let even one of those take me down, so to speak, I wouldn't be where I am today, and I wouldn't have had the amazing opportunities that I've had the privilege to have. So for me, the simple advice of just keep showing up when it's hard, when you don't want to, when things are tough, when people are telling you no, when things are acting as barriers, even when you don't feel wanted, there's something that can be learned in that. There's something that you can gain from it. And so many opportunities have come from me just continuing to make my presence known, make people aware that I'm not going anywhere, that I'm here to stay, and also that I'm here to help has been very, very important for the work that I do. For especially women out there who are scared to put themselves out there, just keep showing up. Show up and you'll see what can happen.
Love it.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Dory had something there. Okay, so next question is, if you could grant all women one wish, anywhere, any age, any place, what would it be?
You folks said we are not starting out heavy. These are big questions. These are big ones. This one's important for me because of the work that I do. And I think for women, I really want them to live in a world without fear or that's not shaped by fear. So much of what women do is shaped by fear, how they walk home, the people that they interact with, how they navigate relationships, even how they interact online in digital spaces, how they read digital spaces. Related to my book that's coming out, and thank you for that introduction, it shapes how women consume true crime content and missing persons cases and crime cases. Most women are not watching it just because it's simple entertainment or they have this weird, morbid fear associated with it. They're watching it to learn how to stay safe. And so my wish would be for a world where women and girls don't have to study danger in order to avoid it or avoid opportunities, not show up or not go out and not have, fruitful relationships with people. I want them to be able to move freely through the world and trust that their environments and their communities and their systems will protect them. And unfortunately, in my work, that has been proven otherwise across a lot of cases. But for me, that's part of why I do what I do. It's to give, a life with the baseline of safety, that they're not learning through someone else's trauma by digesting true crime content, and they're not learning through, unfortunately, negative lived experience. And so it's optimistic. I'm not sure how achievable it is in our contemporary society, but it's something I do work towards in the work that I do.
So important.
I think you have to have that kind of like gold star that
Yeah.
or North Star or whatever, that you have to work towards. So yeah, that's so important and a very wonderful wish that we also wish.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and here's one that might go hand in hand. This last kind of icebreaker question with the last question is, what is your scary? So what keeps you up at night?
What keeps me up at night is
I'm
the
sure lots
hard
of
work
stuff.
I have to do.
Yeah.
But related to that, the reason that I do this work is because it changes lives. It has the ability to make an impact. It has the ability to improve the situation for thousands and thousands of people across Canada and also internationally. And so why sit still, right? Why sit still when you can have that impact on so many people and so many different institutions and systems? And so it's not scary for me. It's very exciting. It's very enticing. It's something that drives me every single day to wake up and do what I do. So, it's related to the first one. It's just keep showing up is embedded in the work that I do. It's related to the second question is, giving women a space to feel safe and cultivating that through the work that I do. So yeah, it's not my scary. What keeps me up at night is the work that I can do and the people that I can help.
Drives you.
Yeah.
I love it.
It drives me. Yeah.
You're very good at weaving a theme
Yeah.
throughout all of this.
Oh,
That was
love
very
it.
I'm a
incredible.
researcher. I'm a researcher.
Prelude to her book.
Researchers. Yeah, there you go.
You're like, I will find the common thread. Don't you worry.
Every time. Yeah. I'm already making patterns and establishing
Yeah.
linkages.
Analyzing the data.
Mm.
Okay, I have a kind of a starter off question that I wanted to ask you. So my question is, I am an absolute consumer of true crime, and I consume it when I'm working, when I'm doing different things. And something like I tell people, they're like, what podcast do you listen to? Because obviously we have a podcast and it's, I listen to the Scaries, but I also listen to other true crime podcasts and different things. And I really find it, I don't want to say fascinating. I really find it just very interesting to see how different things play out. And when it comes to like podcasts or anything, TV shows, like I will consume something like that before bed, and like I can analyze it in my brain. If you put on a scary movie, I'm like, I need to have like a cleanser, like a palate cleanser, but something that's real life for some reason it seems to be okay with. But so my question as context, so my question is, why is it, and you kind of touched on it in your second rapid question, but why is it that true crime is so highly consumed by women, and what is about it that is so intriguing for folks?
This is a big question. And there's a whole chapter in my book dedicated to this question alone.
Perfect.
Why are we so obsessed with it? Why is it embedded in our everyday life? You said it yourself, right? People are scrolling TikTok right before they go to bed. They're on YouTube watching shorts and docuseries. They're on Reddit looking at conspiracy theories and explanations. They're talking about victims like they're talking about their favorite sports teams players and local events that are happening. And instead, they're talking about these significant stories of people's trauma, pain, and suffering in quite lighthearted and everyday ways, right? And so when I ask people, and when you ask yourself this, you say to yourself, well, it's entertainment. It's entertaining, right? It's simple entertainment. It's mindless, but it gives us a puzzle to solve, right? There's that basic explanation. There's also the explanation of it being, informative, right? It tells us about justice system processes, even if it's distorted. It tells us about how cases unfold and what the courts might look like and what the police process can involve. And that's interesting for us because we're getting to peek behind the curtain on things that we don't often see. But I think if a lot of us are honest with ourselves, there's actually bigger forces at play. You said it yourself, right? I'm entertained by it, but I'm more fascinated than it is just entertainment. Because if it was just entertainment, why select the story about a serial killing and significant violence against women as a part of that versus select something like The Big Bang Theory or Selling the Sunset or Love is Blind? Why do we go from one to the other? And so most of us don't actually have an understanding of what those deeper forces at play are. I have a little bit. I have a lot of theories, right? Across, I've been doing this work for more than 10 years. I've worked on over 20,000 different missing persons cases. I've analyzed thousands and thousands of media reports. And so I've talked to a lot of people too, right? There's a lot of explanations, but you can kind of bucket them under a few key themes, being the researcher that I am. One of them being social related reasons, right? Socially, we're connecting with other people. We're having this shared kind of experience with people that we would never have that experience with in everyday life. We're meeting people from the Netherlands that are talking about this. We're meeting people from Japan who are sharing their comments and their views. We're having a bonding experience in a digital space that's giving us a sense of connection and participation. And that's giving us a sense of solidarity when it comes to morals and understanding and culture. So social connection, social participation are two of the big reasons that some people have shared with me why they join it when they actually ask themselves why. There's also psychological reasons, right? A lot of true crime content brings in the same kind of neurochemical reactions that habit, reward, and addiction bring in. Addiction being the dopamine function, the reward cycles being I'm getting gratification from this, I'm developing understanding, or I'm getting likes or shares or engagement with my content. The habit formation being that this is something that we build as a custom in our practice. We don't go to Selling the Sunset or Love is Blind. We're going to click on, oh, there's a new documentary on this person who's killed or this person who was kidnapped. Okay, that's habit forming. Every time we click on that, we're feeding a habit. When we receive gratification from doing that behavior in the form of education, like you talked about, or in the form of social connection and participation, or in the form of, if we're digesting it online and sharing online, engagement, comments, likes, someone just kind of agreeing with us or disagreeing with us, that's still a reward. So we're rewarding that behavior. And these form the grounds of that addiction complex, right? We're kind of getting pulled into it through these kind of psychological, neurochemical mechanisms that operate in the same way that gambling does, or the same way that, participation in sports do. For sports, the driving factor is competition. And for gambling, the driving factor is monetary reward. For true crime engagement or consumption, the driving factor there's many, right? Social connection, participation, as I said, and attention can be another one. Morals, right? We're reaffirming what our morals are. This person's bad and I'm good, right? This person's evil and I'm not. This is what bad looks like in society and how I can avoid it. Here's how I can be good. That's another part. So there's psychological explanations. There is historical explanations. One of the longest running genres in society is true crime. True crime is not a modern invention, right? This is not something that we just invented with streaming services. The earliest form of true crime documentation was in the Bible, when it talked about murders and executions and Jesus dying on the cross, right? And so we have a historical draw to the enigmatic, the grotesque, the gruesome. In history, there's been murder pamphlets that have circulated around town squares where it's documenting the murders of people who committed crimes in great detail. And some people have drawn in these murders into these murder pamphlets. Many, many, many decades ago, there was public executions that were held for criminals if they violated social order or violated the family life or violated the hierarchy in society. And the crowd that would form around those was the whole town, right? And so there's a historical connection. Us as humans, we are so drawn to peeking behind the curtain. Things that are very socially unacceptable to see, we now get to digest in a way that gives us a space or a boundary and a safety from what would be consider socially unacceptable to peek at. So we get to look at things that would be considered taboo or morbid or forbidden or deviant. If we went to peek at a crime scene and look underneath, the sheet over a dead body, you would be condemned for that. Possibly, there'd be criminal sanctions, but socially there'd be sanctions too. But now we get to look under that sheet over the dead body from the safety of our own couch and satisfy that historical, psychological, social curiosity. I could speak about this for hours, but for me, there's also simpler reasons, right? They're emotional journeys. We like to feel emotions as humans, right? It's escapism. We like to escape from the routines of our everyday lives by being drawn to someone else's story. We get to experience and understand deviance. We get to understand criminal processes, things that we wouldn't get an understanding of before without that peek behind the scenes. For women, there's gender components, like I talked about. There's the survival education component. There's the safe scare component. And then there's also the fact that if we're being honest, the true crime genre is sustained by violence against women and girls, right? It is one of the sole or major topics of the stories that true crime puts out. And it is then in turn creating a deeply invested audience base. And then lastly, one of the things you brought up was that it's kind of packaging these stories. You like to find things out and you get to arrive at that resolution. And that's another thing that draws us to it. It's called narrative resolution. Out in society, we're confronting every single day all of these unknowns, right? We're digesting all this news about wars and crimes and people that are not experiencing justice. But in the true crime space, there's a start, there's a middle, and there's an end. And so we're packaged this, what is actually like a really uncertain and complex process, into a very neat 40-minute docuseries on Netflix or Hulu or HBO Max. And so that narrative resolution brings us comfort. And so that connects to those feelings that we're going to experience as a part of the journey. We're going to experience fear, grief, outrage, injustice, panic, comfort, right? And so we're going on an emotional journey. But for me, what's been the most interesting thing about the draw to true crime is that we are drawn to sensationalism, right? We're not drawn to what the lived realities are. We're only drawn to the lived realities when it fits into a dramatic appeal. And that's why my book is called Beyond Serial Killers and Beyond Unexplained Disappearances, because I'm forcing people to look at what realities are, which is actually much more important in this context than look at what is entertaining or what is commodifying trauma, what is the spectacle of things. So I appreciate the question. I would encourage folks, if they're further interested, to read chapter 4 of my book coming out next year, because there's a lot to unpack, right? And I think my final comment here is ask yourself why until you don't have any more answers, right? Or you can't answer anymore. Okay, I like it because it's entertaining. Why is it entertaining? It's entertaining because of this, but why is that entertaining to you specifically? That's entertaining to me because of this, and this connects to this in my life. Okay, but what else is going on here? Is there a feeling that I get when I'm going through this, or I'm watching this, or I'm consuming it? Is there a response that I'm expecting? How do I feel after it? How do I feel before it? What's enticing to me? Why? And then maybe you'll understand what's going on with you, why you're interested in such content. Because if we actually step back from it and stay and think about what it is that we're watching, it's pretty morbid. It's pretty, shaky, let's call it. But it is now a product of our society or cultural life.
I just feel like I got absolutely psychoanalyzed. And there's a lot of things, and that's a joke, but I feel like there's a lot to unpack for Talitha. But that's like we call it like the toddler approach to doing anything. Ask why until you're blue in the face, and then just continuously keep asking why. And yeah, I find it fascinating, everyone's fascination with it as well. And like why, like the 7th JonBenet Ramsey documentary to come out in, a few years, and like it's an absolute spectacle but like it's like the same information, it's the same people, it's just like packaged in a different way. But yes, people still want to consume it, and maybe they'll be the one to like crack the code as to what happens. Anyways.
So fascinating.
All right. Anyways, back to regular scheduled programming. Okay. So the next question then is when did this work become personal for you? If it is personal, when did it become personal for you? Was there a moment or like a case or something that came up and you knew and you said, I can't look away from this?
Okay. I will start with my earliest experience with a missing persons case, and I'll call her Jess. Jess was a teenager who, on the surface, would be what the police would consider a troubled runaway or a troubled youth. Had tattoos and piercings, super young. She was always around this rough and tough crowd. She was always challenging authority, causing trouble everywhere she went. She kept skipping school and drifting into the rough and tough crowd or going to places that adults disapproved of, like under bridges where they're graffitiing, right? It looked like simple rebellion for Jess, but what was underneath that experience for Jess was recently immigrating to Canada. She was grieving significant family loss, and she was experiencing significant social and cultural displacement and disconnection. And then on top of that, she didn't have any support or resources to know how to navigate that. And as a teenager, as teenagers, we were once teenagers ourselves. When you're navigating big life things on top of puberty and growing up and significant change, everything feels like it's too much, right? And so for her, she ran away all the time. It was a way for her to kind of like regain control back on her life and feel a sense of normalcy and a sense of agency and a sense of her own belonging in the spaces that she cultivated. And so it wasn't about crime or abduction. It was just about managing her grief, managing her identity, her cultural dislocation, and I guess the turbulent process of growing up as well, right? And so for her disappearances were short. She would usually come back home in a few days or a few hours. There was nothing sensational about Jess in the cases that I reviewed. There was no big headline, no mystery, no big unanswered questions, nothing to unravel. But that's why her case stuck with me, because Jess represented those everyday, ordinary forms of going missing that actually never make it into the public or media care or attention. These are the cases that most people don't care about. But they are the types of cases that make up the significant majority of missing persons incidents. And so these are the cases that are revealing those huge gaps between what the public imagines and what families and systems are actually dealing with. And so I should say at this point that story is actually about me. I'm Jess, right? And so I had lived experience with going missing from a very young age, and not just once. I went missing all the time. Police called me troubled. They called me a runaway, and no one knew what to do with me. But once I realized I had these experiences that were showing up as patterns in missing persons data and in my research, young people falling through the gaps, young people being misunderstood, missing persons cases more broadly being understood, labeled and unsupported, obviously had to do something about it. I couldn't look away. And so my personal life, as me, and my work have folded together, since I was a very young age. And so from then I've used my lived experience to, launch my research further forward, but also as a way to gain more understanding and insight into what others are experiencing in this space. And then I kind of take that lived experience and I pair it with the insights that I'm learning from first responders and from families and from communities to improve the prevention and response to missing persons. And I think that when we start from a place of lived experience with anything, it fuels way more passion and understanding than what starting from a place of limited or lack of understanding does.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that very personal story. And, I really admire how you're coming from an angle, or you came from an angle of prevention and looking deeper beyond the stereotypes and the systems that, typically police, I would assume, look at, just like, what's the lifestyle? What's the facade? Who are they hanging out with? But what's the real deep problem of why this person is running away? And how can we help that? How can we help, remove that problem or that barrier, or support them in better ways so this doesn't keep happening and it doesn't happen with more people? Yeah, that's such a great insight. Thank you again for sharing.
When you revealed, it was like, wow, okay. And then also just understanding that we're talking about missing persons, and like you could have been a statistic, and like even like reflecting on that, and because we share about statistics and it's like this many people have this, and according to this research and everything else, and just the fact that like you maybe are a statistic, but you've taken that and like reshaped it to make sure that the safety aspect is kind of coming back for women, and that it's considered, and that we don't just like we don't sensationalize the things that can be sensationalized, and ignore everything else that's happening. Anyways,
Yeah.
so,
I always say too, like if I was a teenager now, going missing now, my missing incident would follow me, I'm sure, because it would have been published online and they probably would have selected a terrible picture of me to put out with my missing persons appeal.
of
And
course, yeah.
so that experience as a teenager, of course, I represented a group of people, right? I represented
Right.
youth, I represented youth who were struggling, and I represented also women. But then when I take that experience and I extract it to the broader landscape of missing persons, part of my work is also speaking for people who have been forced to be invisible through institutional silences and gaps, bringing to light the patterns and the overrepresentation and the risks associated with this. So speaking not just from my own experience, but trying to give space to others' experiences that you said it yourself, right? I was a statistic and I could have been a statistic in another category, but what's different about me from other people who have had that experience? Well, the reality is there are, systems and barriers and stereotypes and biasing. The fact that I was labeled a troubled youth led to issues in the response to my cases too. And then you compare that with other intersectional factors like race and ethnicity, you compare that with sex and gender, you compare that with age, you compare that with even like the location where I was versus the location of some other people. And then that contributes to that conversation on risk and overrepresentation and those experiences and how they differ. Why am I here and other people are not? Well, who knows, right? But yeah.
Wow, yeah.
And again, this is not in our list of questions, but because of the, that resolving nature in our brains tendency that we want to have, like, what's the end of the story? If I can ask the end of your story, I mean, we're so honored to have you here with us today and so thankful that you are. Was there someone in your past that saw something in you that dug deeper with you that helped to support you to get, past the things that you were struggling with?
I've had my students ask me this question. I've had my professors ask me it because it's what people are interested in is why you and why you're here and why are they there, but they've had those same life experiences, right? And the answer, I don't have, it's not simple. A lot of it was fueled by spite, like sheer determination to make something of myself and get myself out of the predicaments that I was in. Some of it was working hard, and some of that was luck, right? Some of it was fueled by growing up, right? I have to recognize I had to mature a little bit. So I don't have the blueprint of why me and not other people and why other people and not me. I just know that there's always been something kind of inside me that said there's more to life for you than this. And so elevate, work harder, do something. You got to climb your way out of it. And I'm thankful that I have that trait because it's got me to where I am on, various different paths that could have been way less privileged and way less, impactful.
Yeah. Well, that's a story too, though. Like, you got yourself out of it. You were the support you needed and your hero you needed and all of those things. And I think that goes back to your first kind of question around, just keep going, keep showing up, keep moving forward.
Mhm.
And if you can't do that for yourself, like, who can you do that for? So yeah.
Definitely.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Okay. So one thing, just looking at your research that we also discovered was that police take some cases more seriously than others. So can you share some of the patterns that you've noticed that maybe still make your stomach turn around? What are those cases that police take, or what are those statistics, or what are those, I don't know, factors that cause police to take certain cases more seriously than others?
A lot of it's to do with vulnerability and marginalized status. So Indigenous women, girls, Black women, girls, unhoused people, people who use substances, youth in care. These groups are coming up time and time again in my data and in inquiries, like public inquiries into, like you brought up, the Bruce McArthur cases about these are the types of cases that get minimized, disregarded, misclassified, and entirely ignored. I was labeled as a runaway. And these cases in turn are stigmatized and stereotyped and treated as non-urgent or less urgent. They'll likely turn up on their own. They just ran away, they'll come back. Even when families communities, social and healthcare staff, right? Because people are going missing from group homes and hospitals and homeless shelters and women's safe spaces, are very clearly saying to the police, no, this is not normal for them. Like something's wrong in this case. And so it's about, when we talk about police, we want to point the finger and say it's this agency or it's this officer, but the police represent the system, right? Criminology done here, right? Looking at the individuals and the people and the specific cases, the case of me or the case of this person who went missing. And then we can look at criminology, what I call up here, or macro criminology. We look at the systems of stuff. What are the patterns? What's the umbrella going on here? And the umbrella is that these things, an institution or a system that's based on judgment, discretion, subjectivity, bias, and stereotyping. And so when there's that possibility of a negative or harmful stereotype or a negative or harmful judgment being associated with a case, those cases are treated differently than cases that are fitting a typical mold of acceptable, what's considered acceptable, and what's considered worthy. Worthy being, upper class, middle class, white, women too do fit in that, but men as well. And so when there's room for judgment, stereotyping, and stigma, that's when the response varies, right? Another thing I've noticed is that when the responses can vary based on how it fits that kind of true crime template, right? The young women, photogenic, youthful, beautiful, with a clear story and, kind of a more narrative kind of resolution to it with a villain and a kind of typical ending, versus when someone's life is more complicated. Let's use that word. The former gets rapid mobilization, more urgent designation, emergency response, national media attention, intense pressure on the police to do something from the public, whereas the latter tends to get slower starts and skepticism and a lot of waiting for updates. Even just the delayed response can negatively affect the missing person's case. And so families have shared with me time and time and time again that when their loved one's file does not receive that same urgency as another case or someone else that they're seeing online, it's significantly traumatizing and it causes a lot of grief. And these patterns are not random, right? And the patterns concentrate along those intersections of vulnerability and marginalization. They map onto racism, sexism, classism, and ableism that are existing in these systems. So systems of institutions and systems of media. So officers are operating within that system, and therefore they're acting out what the system's kind of steering towards.
So many things. It sounds like it's so out of reach, like to change, right? Like what can we do about it? Those systematic problems are like feel so far away, so big to wrap your arms around to do anything about. So thank you for doing the work in this area, because I know you are digging deeper and kind of nitpicking at what these systems are and what changes we can make and how we can be preventative. But yeah,
even when you said like someone needs a villain, that's so like spot on. I was actually having a conversation with someone today and we were talking about Wicked, the movie, and how they talk about like there needs to be a villain and like the society needs a villain, and like even like we were talking about like what's happening in our world right now, and it's like, Canada at one point was like a little bit divided, and then all of a sudden we had this like one common enemy, and now Canada is like we're all together in it again. And so like it can be so macro and also so individual, and so like when there is a villain or someone who's done something bad to somebody, it's easy to say like, or like there is a villain out there, we got to go find them, like get your pitchforks and your your torches and let's go after them. Versus if there's someone who's like stereotypically, and I'll say this, or like following patterns of or being in a marginalized space, or have different not as many privileges, I guess, that then people start to say, well, like maybe they did that to themselves, or like they're the villain. And like, and then that's when the narrative, I would assume, can kind of like, it can get so skewed, and where we don't hear about these stories and they don't make national headlines. And like, I think every single one should, but it obviously doesn't. Which is why you're here, which is why your book exists, which is why all of these things. Anyways, yeah. Do you have anything to add to that? Or am I like, yeah.
No, you're right. It's called the attribution of responsibility, right?
Oh, there you go.
In media, for example, it's a specific frame that they use to give narration to the story. So they attribute blame or responsibility to a particular actor or a particular event or a particular thing. And that way, the story has a nice, neat narrative resolution or a narrative template. The attribution of blame helps us understand the story and then make sense of who's to blame and who's not to blame. In the absence of someone to blame or the assignment of responsibility, the true crime genre has been known to make up villains, right? Target particular people, point the finger. In the case of John Benet Ramsey that you brought up,
Yeah.
her brother
Yeah.
has been targeted time and time again, even though he's been ruled out as a suspect so many times, right? So we make up villains even if they don't exist, and when they don't exist, that pulls us in even more. We're more interested. We're like, okay, who did that? What's going on? Who did it? Who did it? We need to have a cause for this incident or a cause for this happening. And so the concept of the villain trope, the hero, villain, and the victim, those three templates are what drives the true crime genre forward. That's their storyline elements, or the
Yeah.
media too. That's their storyline elements. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it's easy to follow a narrative, as you said, and like get after, like everyone bands together against one kind of common enemy. So you've worked with many families. You said you've worked on, thousands and thousands of cases. And often when you're working with families when they are at their most broken, or they're facing a lot of despair. What do you wish people understood about what it means to live with a missing loved one?
I would say two main things here.
Yeah.
The first being that I would hope people would have more of an understanding that this is not just a moment for so many families and loved ones. It can become a way of life for them, right? It's not just a news story or like a search for 1 week. For people with a loved one who is missing for an extended period of time, we call those cold cases or long-term cases. It is living in that constant state of maybe for months, years, sometimes decades for certain families. And so families are expected to go to work, to pay their bills, to parent their children, to make decisions about estates and belongings and bank accounts, and all while not knowing if their loved one is alive or dead. And that uncertainty is absolutely brutal. There's a scholar called Dr. Pauline Voss. She calls it ambiguous loss. And that's that feeling of being in limbo, caught between holding on and then letting go every single day. And so they wish people would know that the work for them does not stop when the police stop. It does not stop when the media and the public move on. It stops when they stop, because families become researchers, they become the archivists, they become the advocates for these cases. They build websites, manage tip lines, organize on social media, put out posters, they're organizing vigils, they're handing out information on their loved one in the case specifics. So they're basically running their own small investigation on top of their grief, on top of their suffering, and on top of their pain. And so that's one major thing, because a lot of people, when they're digesting content on missing persons and crime cases, they see the person and their family as a character, not as someone with real experience. And so that takes me to my second point, is that my biggest hope is that the public and the media would stop treating missing persons cases as entertainment. When a creator on TikTok or a podcaster takes a family's loved one's story and turns it into this puzzle or a mystery to digest and dissect without consent, without collaboration, or without care, that's another violation for families and loved ones. They tell me over and over again, we want our person to be remembered as who they are, not as content to be engaged with. And so the public don't see the cost of this kind of transformation that this individual and their family go through once a case becomes entertainment. And at that time, the family loses complete control over the narrative. They wake up to strangers speculating about their loved ones' mental health, relationships, their citizenship status and their marriage status, their addictions, their sexuality, their last movements, who they're affiliated with, who they're associated with, what they were doing, what they weren't doing. Are they on drugs? Are they going through an alcoholic binge? And also about them as parents, as partners, as siblings, as cousins, as aunts and uncles. Rumors become these clues that web sleuths take on. Innocent people become suspects to be targeted, to face bullying campaigns, creepy and trolling behavior, parasocial relationships. because they blinked too slowly in an interview, or they were holding their hands and there was someone doing behavioral, like rudimentary behavioral analysis on them, or maybe they posted something on Facebook and the public didn't like the wording of it. And so families have to watch their trauma be dissected and reshaped into something that fits the logic of that narrative resolution, that suspense, the heroes, the villains, the twists, and the cliffhangers. And so there are real implications for this, right? Misinformation spreads faster than police updates. Police face bureaucracy and policy requirements that require them to withhold certain information. And so crowdsourced web sleuthing, that's sounding, but web sleuthing can drown out verified details and overwhelm tip lines and re-traumatize witnesses and even actively derail police investigations. And so families then become responsible for correcting those falsehoods, navigating their grief, being the archivists and advocates and searchers for their missing person. And they're barely struggling, like they're barely coping. They're struggling to sleep. They're barely getting themselves to work. They're barely surviving. And there's social costs to that, right? We've talked about some of them already. So one of the things that people don't consider is that when people are put out into digital spaces, we cannot take that back in our digital age. We don't have a right to be forgotten. We don't have privacy legislation that protects their information. And so what I like to do when I interact with the public is ask them how they would feel if their information was out there like that, and if their families were going through that. And that often makes people pause and say, maybe I should be a little bit more critical of my behaviors and actions in this space. And so giving that perspective to people brings to light what the families are going through. And so those are my two things. The first one being that for families, a lot of them are not going through one moment. This is a lifelong experience, and they're doing it under-supported or unsupported, and they're doing it on their own while doing everything else in life. And then secondly, the consequences of what we do as the public can be profound on the families and loved ones of the missing, as well as the missing person themselves if they do return.
You can do a lot of harm as well by not doing both of those things. Like you can do a lot of harm by, sensationalizing someone's story or not considering that it wasn't just, the first week in October that was a tough week for this family. It's been every day since that first week in October, or whatever it is, then when that person went missing. But then also when folks, and because I do consume true crime, but I'm going to I think I'm going to reevaluate that now after this conversation.
You don't have to. I'm going to pause you, because when I talk about this stuff, people get defensive or upset. They're like, "Oh shit, I've been bad, right? I'm in trouble. I've been operating in a way that's not in line with my values, or I shouldn't do this because of the effect." I'm not saying don't engage, but I am saying have an awareness of what this would mean and what your engagement means and how you're carrying yourself. And we can talk about it at the end of we get to it. There's strategies that you can take on to be what I call an ethical consumer of true crime content. There is a way to approach it in a way that, mitigates your guilt and makes it a bit better than what we're currently doing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Can't wait to get to those.
Yeah. Looking forward to understand how to be an ethical consumer of true crime.
Totally. Well, just on the topic of this and talking about the families and what they're going through, we did have a family of a missing person on our podcast last spring.
Yep.
And it was parents of their daughter who's been missing for years. And they shared their stories. They shared their frustrations with the system. They shared photos. They shared about the case. They shared kind of everything. And some of the things that we kind of took away, obviously there's many, but there's that kind of what you touched on, the ambiguity of just not knowing, like not having that answer, not having the closure, but still having to fight every single day and feel like you can't give up, because if you do, then you're just admitting to something, right, that you don't want to believe. And so there was that, but there was also a lot of contention with the systems and how there's all this funding, especially in Saskatchewan, around missing people, especially Indigenous. This woman was Indigenous or is Indigenous who's missing. And they felt that the system, specifically like the criminal system or the police system, could do better. And so do you have any thoughts on that, of like what we can do better, or what changes the system should make? And I'm sure there are many, and this is a very deep, loaded question, but at a high level, what are families most frustrated with, and like are there changes that are being made right now, or what are you seeing from your lens?
Families have shared with me that the police are failing on multiple levels when it comes to working with them on these cases and the response to these cases. Um, Silence is the biggest one, right? Like no clear updates, no phone calls or regular emails, no initiative to move the case forward. A lot of what's happening in policing is based off of individual officer initiative. And I'll clarify that. So in the policing system, missing persons is seen as not real police work, right? It is not a crime to go missing in Canada. If you're a capable adult, I can close my laptop off this phone with you and leave to Hawaii, and no one can get in touch with me ever again. And there's nothing anyone can do about that from a legal perspective, right? I'm allowed to go missing at any point in time. And so when we look at the police mandate, police are mandated to respond to crimes or law enforcement violations. Of course, for children, there's a duty of care and safeguarding that plays a part. So there's more authority and a willingness to investigate those cases. But if we're talking about the majority of cases, police don't see it as their problem or their responsibility. And again, that we're talking about a system, we're not talking about individual officers. So when you have those tensions, right? You've got the criminal justice framework that police operate in sitting uneasily alongside the welfare and humanitarian dimension that missing persons cases require and demand. You're going to see cracks across multiple levels. And with the fact that it's been treated as not real police work, it's seen as a community service function, that means that they're under-resourced, underfunded, and police officers care quite little. And I'm generalizing. I shouldn't generalize because there are officers that care a lot about this. But when you're talking about a system, missing persons is very under prioritized because of all the other criminal events that police are required to deal with. And so when you look at it through that perspective, and I'm not excusing what's going on, but I'm giving explanation for it, that the faults and failures make sense in one way. When you don't have priority, you don't have organizational support, you don't have provincial or departmental funding associated with it, when you don't have resources in place that deal with it, not only do you not have resources, but the resources that are in place, they're not necessarily trained or specialized or equipped to deal with them. Of course, we're going to see issues. That's the comment there. It's not that I'm excusing it, but it makes sense in one perspective why those things are happening. And so going back to that, when it's treated as not real police work or viewed as not real police work, who's doing the work in the system, right? And so we have an absence of dedicated personnel. So a lack of family support liaisons, a lack of missing persons coordinators, a lack of missing persons units. Who's going to call the families and update them? Who's going to do that? And so there are some services that have those roles available, but the challenge is that there's nothing consistent across Canada. There's nothing consistent within an agency, and there's very little that's formalized. So there's a lot of turnover. And so families are treated outside even what the missing people are treated within. So missing people themselves are not getting enough attention and priority, never mind their families and loved ones. So you're getting, a system of issues. So they're not getting updates. There's no police in the system to work on the case. Most cases across Canada are being resolved by frontline police officers who are responsible for hundreds upon hundreds of calls and who are trained in a general function, meaning just across the board, all policing functions, that's what they're responsible for. So there's a lack of specialization there. And most of them don't know what trauma-informed and culturally appropriate servicing means. And so when you're dealing with families and loved ones who are victims in this process as well, there's a lack of awareness on how to deal with them, as well as a lack of resources. So that's some explanation for it. What families have asked from police are appearing decade after decade, right? We can talk about the 2012 Missing Women Commission of Inquiry by Wally Opal. That identified over 60 recommendations for improving police response and prevention work. The same recommendations, as well as others, appeared in the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women in 2019. And then the same and more recommendations appeared in the Missing and Missed Inquiry by Judge Epstein for the Toronto Police Service failures with the Bruce McArthur cases. That one had over 150 recommendations, many of which appeared in 2012. So we're talking about decades worth of the same issues being identified and the same requests being made by families. Those requests are: talk to me, give me updates, look for options for the case to reignite it, stay in touch with me. Even if there's no news, still let me know, hey, this is still on my radar. We've got nothing right now, but here's what some things that could be coming down the pipeline. Another big thing is practical guidance, right? Like, you don't know what a missing person's response and case requires until you get a crash course and go through it. So you don't know, like, bank accounts need to be dealt with, social media profiles need to be dealt with, legal issues need to be dealt with, the documentation of case updates and pictures and who's done what and who did what and who talked to who and what time was that and who did. Information management is huge. Families need guidance on navigating that. And it might not need to come from the police, but it is a significant gap that exists across the system of social and healthcare services that no one's supplying that servicing to. It's complicated when someone goes missing, especially if they're not declared deceased. From a legal perspective, that's tough to navigate. Another is recognition that they are victims, right? And with that recognition comes along supports that victims get in the victim services system in Canada: mental health supports, peer group supports, grief supports, access to legal and aid advice. And so that's a generic component, like supports generically, but there's a second to that. I'd add an addendum to that they need tailored supports by social workers, counselors, psychiatrists, psychologists who understand the ambiguous loss component that missing people bring forth for families and loved ones. And so we need system change, we need individual change, we need support and servicing change, we need resourcing change, and we need recognition change. Call it what it is. Families and loved ones are victims through this process. And with that follows a bunch of resources and supports that are, untapped or under available to families and loved ones. So a longer answer, there's a lot more that families and loved ones have identified, but I would say those are the key ones from my work and all the inquiries across the decades.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think that something that we've heard, and like we've read, but something that we've heard, especially with the Happy Charles episode that we did with her family, is that there are so many pieces, and as you've just laid out, kind of there's lots of pieces, and the ownership of kind of who owns each piece. So if police own one thing, but it's maybe not their top priority, or maybe they can't say anything, or maybe all these other things, and then someone is trying to be their liaison, but they don't own that information and they can't actually access it, and so then there's all these frustrations, and it's all very, very reactionary. And I mean, even just as you said, police work kind of in itself is reactionary. Like, it's not, there is obviously now things I know that they're doing, and that's not a blanket statement, but there is prevention in some ways. But overall, police work is reactionary, and that something happens and then they do the work to kind of figure out what happened or solve the problem and that sort of thing. So when we look at then trying to prevent things and being on the prevention side of it, there is, I think, probably a lot that we can do differently. But if you could kind of highlight a couple things that we could as a society do differently before someone goes missing, to actually protect, and I'll speak kind of at the most vulnerable level of the folks who are going missing, which is generally women and young girls, kind of from the stats that we've seen, what can we do to try to prevent those missing situations?
A very heavy question. And I'm going to break it down a little bit. Yeah. No, I have a big answer. That's the problem.
Okay, great.
Okay, so when we talk about prevention, a lot of us feel hopeless because we're talking about what is considered in social and public health policy primary prevention. Primary prevention is about addressing the social, economic, and structural conditions that make someone vulnerable long before they ever go missing. Things like poverty, mental health, housing instability, discrimination in the systems, mental health issues that are causing family disconnection and relationship disconnection, the lack of culturally grounded support. Those are primary prevention things. Those are root causes, and those are enormous, right? We can't tackle those. Us three in this room, the police, that's not their job to tackle root cause issues, right? And so primary prevention, stopping people from going missing in the first place by addressing those root causes, it feels hopeless because no single family, no community, no agency alone can fix those structural conditions that could prevent someone going missing. You can't prevent disappearance if a person has no home to return to, or no consistent access to care, or no meaningful support or social connection, right? These are whole of society failures. And we also have to think about the fact that sometimes going missing cannot be prevented, right? Again, if I bugger off to Hawaii today after talking with you guys, you can't do anything about that. How are you going to prevent me from going missing? Because going missing is such a broad category, captures miscommunications, occurs going lost in the woods, accidents, captures people living with dementia, wandering. How can you stop someone going missing in those scenarios? How can you stop me from closing my laptop and going to Hawaii because I want to? The reality is you can't, right? You can't force people to not go missing. And so, of course, I still believe in primary prevention. I'm not saying that we should not consider primary prevention, but I think we need to talk beyond that, beyond stopping people from going missing, because I want to empower us, not, disable us in terms of what we can and should do. And so there's two other types of prevention. There's secondary prevention and tertiary. So the secondary prevention is preventing or minimizing risk and harm once a disappearance happens. That includes things like police risk assessment, technology-assisted location tools like cell phone pings, or tracking software for folks who wander because they have cognitive impairments, like Project Lifesaver is one of those. It's like a watch that tracks where people go. Silver alerts, those alerts that come out when someone who does wander goes missing. Amber alerts, those are secondary prevention initiatives. Those identify vulnerability and minimize and reduce or completely inhibit harm once the disappearance occurs. How do we stop people from feeling and experiencing victimization and harm and even death because of a missing incident? Well, those are those secondary prevention initiatives, right? For many women and girls, especially Indigenous women, unhoused persons, people struggling with mental health issues, these rapid kind of prevention responses are life-saving, right? They are the reasons that people can go missing and not experience, a slew of negative events. Then there's tertiary. Tertiary prevention is the long-term work that happens once someone is found, right? I think from the statistics you folks read up that a lot of people who go missing more than once. In one of my data sets of missing persons reports, in a 4-year span, one person was reported missing 134 times. And so I've added up the numbers, I've looked at patterns, and I sit there and I go, okay, what happened at episode 2? What happened at episode 10? What happened at episode 30? What happened at episode 60? What happened at episode 70? What happened at episode 100? Where was the intervention, right? And so that's tertiary prevention. That's stepping in after a person has gone missing once to prevent repeat missing persons incidents, because the more times you go missing, the increase in vulnerability, the increase in risk every time, right? And so this is where systems fail most often. This is where we're seeing a lot of issues, a lot of gaps. Me, as a troubled youth runaway who went missing multiple times, where was the intervention to stop that? It wasn't there. It's still not there, right? So we need structured, collaborative, coordinated tertiary prevention efforts once someone is returned or located. That means that building prevention into the system needs to be a target. So in England and Wales, for example, they do what's called a police return interview, or return support discussion, or a return home interview. There's so many names for it, but that's when police and other service providers interview the missing person once they've returned and ask them, hey, what happened? Why did you go missing? What happened while you're missing? How can I better support you? And that actually inhibits further episodes. Another initiative that was really cool, I was a part of this at police service in Ontario. One officer was like, hey, we need to do something. There's a group home in our city who is causing 1/4 of our missing persons reports. 1/4 of all their reports in 1 year is coming from this one child care group home. And what did they do? They went to Little Caesars. They got a couple of $5 pizzas and a couple of bottles of pop. And every Friday night, they would go sit in that group home and talk to the youth there and say, hey, my name is Officer such and such. Here's my information. Get in touch with me if you're thinking about leaving. Let me know where you are so I know that you're safe. and maybe don't do that, right? Like maybe don't do it because here's all the things that can go wrong when you go missing. Here's all the issues that can come up. And here's what happens from the police's side and from the staff's perspective. And guess what? They reduced their missing persons incidents from that agency by 34%. That's
Wow.
crazy when we think about the volume of that across year after year after year.
Right.
I don't want to toot their horn too much because that was a very short-lived project. Here, the issue with sustainability when it comes to initiatives in policing. Point being, there are prevention initiatives that we can do, secondary and tertiary, and we can also engage in primary prevention initiatives. So it's not inevitable to go missing, and it's not inevitable to experience risk, harm, vulnerability, and even death when someone goes missing. And it's not inevitable for someone to go missing more than once. We can intervene through several different mechanisms. And the first one is social connection, right? Recognizing that we have the ability to stop people from going missing by connecting with them, asking them if they're okay, asking if we can help, grabbing a slice of pizza with them, going out for coffee, talking to your fellow neighbors in your community, and just being active and watching people and making sure that you're taking care in your network. Talking about this stuff, right? Us having this conversation and hopefully people viewing it and saying, okay, there's something I can do here. Okay, maybe I'm more careful about charging my phone so that I don't give my loved one an absolute panic attack when they can't get in touch with me. Maybe I don't take extra time on my way home from work because I need to decompress, but I just communicate a little bit so that they're not panicking. Like there's so much that we can do to prevent missing persons incidents. But when we talk about harm, those are the three levels: primary, root causes; secondary, reducing harm, risk, and death when someone goes missing; and tertiary, reducing repeat incidents so that we further reduce risk, harm, and death thereafter.
First of all, this is a side note. I love talking to educators because we both come from parents who are educators, and like they're always like, "This is what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you the thing, and then this is what I told
and then
you."
in summary,
Yeah. And there's three things. Very structured. I love it.
Our moms do that all of the time, and so I was like, I love that you told me what you just told me, which was incredible because you wrapped it up, and that's perfect. But that's also just an easy way for people to remember things. But what I really heard from you saying that was that humans just want to be seen, heard, understood. So if you provide some of that, and that example with the police officers and the pizza and just hanging out with folks and giving them, especially young people, I think that kind of, not attention, like they're seeking attention, but just showing that they're valued and that people
They're
care.
loved, yeah.
That they're loved. Yeah, support. That makes such a huge difference.
Absolutely. And we can do that, right? Like we can do that. We can check in on our neighbors and our loved ones and their community members, like, hey, Bob across the street, are you doing okay? Hey, I'm noticing these weird little things. How can I help? Just show up. It goes back to the first thing in full circle, back to where we started. Show up for people. And that can help in so many different ways, not just related to missing persons, but across so many different scenarios. If we take that bottom up initiative to care about our community and our loved ones, I think a lot of good things can happen from there.
Yeah, definitely.
Sure. I think we could skip that one. Yeah.
So if you had a magic wand, we're getting very ethereal here, but if you had a magic wand and you could change a couple things, 3 things, 4 things about how Canada handles missing persons cases. And I know that like every jurisdiction, every province, every police service, everyone is different. What would you change? And if you could change it?
Only 3.
Another big question.
There's a lot, but at a high level, because you mentioned a lot of things, a lot of gaps.
Yeah. I think first and most basic, I would marshal significant, sustained investment and attention to missing persons cases and prevention and response, not true crime sensationalism attention, not crime media sensationalism attention. I'm talking like real policymaker, government, federal level down to communities attention that can generate a sense of urgency that's grounded in the reality of these cases, that's grounded in what's actually happening on the ground. And that means building a system that's proactive and invested, not reactive and media dependent, which could look like long-term stable funding, early intervention programs, robust resources, collaborative approaches to this work. It's not just the police's responsibility. It is all of us, including us in this podcast, including social and healthcare services, collaboration. It includes public education campaigns, real political leadership that treats missing persons as a social problem and a public health issue, not as an occasional headline, not as something to care about when it's a high profile incident and they're receiving significant priority and pressure and attention on it. We need resources. We need sustained invested resources. And the second one would be something that we've talked about previously, which is sustained support for families and loved ones, not as a charity, but as a right, a fundamental formal support embedded in different systems, not just in the police system as family liaison officers, but also in social and healthcare services with them having family liaison officers. Recognition at Victim Services Canada that they also are victims and they also need access to victim services, right? They need that funded legal, financial, and mental health supports. Very important for families with long-term missing loved ones. And then also formal pathways for families to contribute knowledge and information to the landscape of missing persons, to police investigations, because they're so ignored and they're so used to feeling used. Like formal pathways for that. And I don't have an answer to that one, but that's what I would hope for. I'm okay with being a little delusional sometimes, and that's something I want for them, right? How can we get them recognition and attention in a formal, structured way? Data on their experiences, data on what they need, data, documentation. So that would be the second thing that I would want for the field. And the third, just as we talked about, massively investing in prevention. Prevention, not just looking at root causes, not feeling hopeless. I mean, prevention that's across every level that one can be prevented from going missing. Follow-up care for people who return, stable funding like we talked about, people charging their cell phones and getting in touch with their loved ones, building social connection and community, and recognizing too that prevention looks different for different people and groups, considering those intersectional factors that we talked about. What missing white women need is going to be different than missing Black people and missing Black families, missing Indigenous peoples. We need to recognize that, just like a generalized kind of blanket approach to prevention and support is not sufficient here. We need to recognize vulnerabilities and recognize gaps in the system. And so, again, a little delusional. I'm working on figuring out how to do all this, but at least talking about it and saying like, here's what's needed, here's how we can do it, here's some things that's going on across the world. It is attainable. It definitely is. It just requires us to carve that path. And I'm hoping that, we're all kind of working on it somewhere, some way across Canada. Yeah.
Well, I think also just, being delusional is always great and being optimistic and hopeful, but also you're now sharing it with us. Like I had absolutely no idea where to start with this. So, now I have some things I can share about and talk about, and whether it's, me talking to someone directly or just sharing about this, or it just brings awareness and brings attention to the problem that we have. So,
Totally. Plants a seed, gets us thinking more brains are better than 3, So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I did want to revisit something. I had said that there's something that you can do as a consumer of true crime. If that's okay, we can revisit that.
That was my last question.
Yeah.
Please
I'm
share.
sorry.
We need to know how to be ethical consumers of true crime. Please.
You said it first, right? Awareness, right? You have this understanding now, right? You know what the landscape looks like. You know what the potential implications are. You understand a little bit deeper about those mechanisms that are contributing to your fascination or your obsession or your draw to true crime. What do you do with that awareness, right? We can't just have an awareness. We need to act on that. And so there's a lot that you can do. The first thing is be critical, right? If you're on TikTok and some creator is saying something that's wrong, that's sensationalized, that's out of pocket, right? Like unfair to the victims and co-victims, being families and loved ones, that is clickbait, that's recycling old theories or things that have been dead for a while or things that are not fruitful to the investigation, call them out, right? Write a comment, and don't engage with that creator until they are being better in their work and in their role, right? That's one example, but there's many ways that you can turn that awareness into action, right? Talk about it with people. Say, we talk about true crime like we talk about sports or what we're doing this weekend. When you do that, talk about the reality. Don't talk about those sensational headlines or the most recent docuseries. Talk about, oh yeah, there was this missing persons case in this Netflix show. Did you know that? Did you hear about? Have you learned about what's happening behind the scenes? Do you know about the people that are being invisible in this landscape, right? And that's one way that you can spread that a little bit in your space, which has ripple effects, the butterfly effect, which we all know, right? You never know what you do and where where what you do will go, right? What impact that will have. The third thing is engage with true crime content that is a tad more ethical. I'm still on the fence about if is an ethical true crime, right? So I'm not going to say there is, I'm not going to say there's not. Content can look like collaborating with families and loved ones, elevating their story and backgrounding their own voice, right? It can look like elevating the actual police statistics and the police facts of the case versus the sensational headlines or picking out one tiny thing or blowing up one clue or one text message or video, like grainy video surveillance. Like creators that focus and crime storytellers that focus on facts and figures and education are ones that should be more consumed. Weird thing to say, but ones that should be listened to, I feel, more than people that are spreading misinformation, sensationalism, and ignoring certain people and groups and ignoring the realities. So that's another thing you can do. So don't engage if it does that, right? Your attention is what's sustaining the industry. And so if you don't engage, you don't give attention, people will change their behaviors eventually because they're not getting clicks, likes, attention, money, right? Subscriptions, followers, whatever the reward is. That's another thing that you can do. And then I think the third thing is, or I don't even know what number I'm at, whatever number I'm at.
The last one
is, again, think about the ways that you can contribute here. Connection is prevention, right? Checking in on people. The way in which you interact in society with others affects people. The way in which you interact with others digitally affects people. It affects case outcomes. It affects policymaker attention. Like, we do matter. Us as individuals actually compound, right? We build in accumulation to represent a big mass. We have a lot of power in that. So small moments of change make a big difference, and small moments of conscious choice and awareness and action make a big difference. And so not all hope is lost. We can engage with true crime content, but there's small things that we can do that I think can improve the situation for many.
Definitely. That was absolutely incredible advice.
Yes. Thank you so much. Honestly, this has been I feel like we're in your class, we're reading your book, like sneak peeks to all the things, but so enlightening, so insightful. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your story and your advice for how we can do better and be better.
Yes. Thank you for having me. You're contributing by giving space to talk about this stuff. And so you're a part of the solution, and I'm thankful for that.
Thank you.
I'm just gonna.
So we just unpacked some of the most harrowing truths. Too many women vanish into invisibility, whether they want to or don't, especially in Saskatchewan and across Canada, with police and systems often looking the other way.
But we also heard clarity from Dr. Ferguson about how to begin reversing this. So improve data transparency and bias-focused training and policing and equitable resource distribution and media accountability, being an ethical consumer of true crime, all of that.
So now what? What do we do? I mean, Dr. Lorna shared many key tips, so I don't think we're going to go too far because we already have a lot of the answers. But honestly, it's hard because, like kind of mentioned, you can feel hopeless, helpless. This is such a huge systemic problem. But there are things we can do individually and collectively. And I think a lot of that, for me, what stuck out with Dr. Lorna was the social connection, just checking in, being the community who lifts people up from underneath.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that's really important is to also support the organizations that are doing the work on the side. So very similar, and I would be remiss if we didn't mention the organization that Dr. Lorna Ferguson founded, which is the Missing Persons Research Hub. There is a lot of information there. They're doing incredible work for educating law enforcement and changing how cases are handled and how missing persons folks kind of go through the system and how their information is shared.
And if you live in Canada, especially Saskatchewan, hold your local reps accountable. The province has one of the highest missing rates per capita, and Indigenous families are still not getting resources they need, as we heard.
Finally, resist sensationalism. I know it's hard, but these aren't true crime entertainment. These are real people, real families going through real tragedies, and they deserve peace and justice. I know that as a consumer of true crime, I'm definitely going to be a more ethical consumer of true crime. Thanks to Dr. Lorna Ferguson's kind of outline of ways that we can be better consumers, because I think that there's definitely ways that I have contributed to the bad things. So I'm going to avoid that at all costs.
We don't want to live in a country where missing women go ignored. I think that's the bottom line, is that we don't want to ignore missing women and write them off and, care for a week and then stop thinking about it. Every disappearance merits urgency, action, empathy, and sustained actions in all of those things.
I hope that this episode has sparked conversation for you, has maybe sparked some outrage, but also action. And we owe it to the ones who have vanished and who are still missing, and their family who are left behind.
And if anything has stayed with you, share this episode, talk to your city councilor, call your police board, share it with your friends and your networks. Let's make sure she never just vanished.
Thank you for joining us today as we confronted these terrifying but real life statistics and stories impacting women and girls. Please share this episode, rate and subscribe wherever you are listening, and stay tuned for more ways to make a positive impact. Together, we can make the world a little less scary for women and girls.
And be sure to follow us on Instagram at RaiseHerCo and at Scaries.podcast, and on TikTok at RaiseHerCo. And remember that change starts with awareness and action, which we are doing here today. So thank you so much for being part of the Scaries community and making this world a little less scary to exist as a woman. Bye.
Bye.